Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar, Cyberbullying and Youth from Understanding to Prevention. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website later for later viewing. My name is Amy Malloy. I'm the project director of the School Mental Health Resource and Training Center, a project of the Mental Health Association in New York State. Joining with me today is Cohen Miles Rath, one of our project coordinators. In the upper right corner of your screen, you'll see something that looks like two boxes stacked on top of each other. The first box is the audio selection. If you would like to join by telephone, choose a telephone option, call the number that shows up, and use the audio pin. All attendees are muted during the presentation. The second box is where you can type and submit questions to us, including any problems you may have accessing the audio or video. A member of our tech team will provide support. We have hundreds of people participating in today's webinar, so if we do not get to all of your questions, we will follow up with an FAQ on our website. The Mental Health Association in New York State works to improve the lives of individuals, families, and communities by raising mental health awareness, ending stigma and discrimination, and wellness and recovery. The School Mental Health Resource and Training Center was established by Mahaney's with funding from the New York State Legislature and Executive to help schools implement a law requiring mental health instruction as part of the K-12 health curriculum. We are recording this webinar in April at a time when all New Yorkers are engaging in social distancing and schools have been closed now for several weeks. Students are spending more time online for the purposes of learning, but also it is a primary way that people are connecting with one another. Through texts and chats and social media, people are connected by technology today more than ever. While there are a lot of heartwarming examples of people supporting one another and checking in one another, we also know that cyberbullying has long been a problem, and the increased use of technology and social media during this time of social distancing could very well increase risk. So today's presentation is timely and a very important topic. We'd like to thank the New York State Office of Mental Health for their funding and support of this webinar. Following this webinar, participants will better understand cyberbullying and how often it occurs. We'll learn how to recognize cyberbullying and the impact it has on youth, social and emotional development. And most importantly, we will end with clear strategies about how we can all help prevent cyberbullying. Most of the information in this webinar was gathered through two main sites, cyberbullying.org and stopbullying.gov. Other resources will be identified along the way, and we will provide them on our website and at the end of this presentation. So let's get started. Cohen, help us understand cyberbullying. And in general, are youth in New York State experiencing cyberbullying on a regular basis?
Yes, thank you, Amy. So, with the advent of technology and the way it has changed our social world, youth cyberbullying has emerged as a serious problem. As you will learn, cyberbullying with youth is complex, and its frequency requires us to take action with it. Bullying behavior is intended to harm or coerce another person and requires an imbalance of power and repetition. Bullying includes physical, verbal, and social harm. However, cyberbullying is unique in the sense that it is primarily verbal and social as it takes place in the digital world. The digital world is so expansive and complex that harmful, false, and mean content can be communicated in many ways. For example, a negative comment, the amount of likes an interaction has, and even the usage of a certain emoji can enhance the negative feelings a target could feel after being cyberbullied. Personal and private information is at risk of being communicated through digital means, and this can cause embarrassment and humiliation in an instant second. And the content utilized in the digital world can be really difficult to keep under control because of the freedom we have in this world. It is also important to point out how cyberbullying can become unlawful or criminal. An example would be sharing inappropriate images that goes against laws of consent and or age-permitted laws. These are common areas where cyberbullying can occur. Many of us are familiar with the most popular social media channels, such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Text messaging, instant message, and email each follow a similar chat structure of one-to-one or group discussion that have capabilities of sending videos, photos, documents, and the sharing of content from other online platforms. For youth particularly, there are additional social media apps such as TikTok and WhatsApp that directly target them. It is important to note that platforms for social interaction are always being developed and used by youth, which requires more investigation into what children are using and how they are using it. For example, I was at a New York State school social worker conference this past year where a presentation was given by two FBI agents who specialize in tracking sexual predators online. They expressed how each online platform is unique and challenging because they allow people to be very strategic and deceptive on how they target and abuse children. And they have to be constantly vigilant with what platforms are popping up as the internet is always expanding day to day.
Yeah, I know certainly as a parent myself, that's a big challenge is the changing and emerging programs. According to the Cyberbullying Research Center, 95% of teens in the US are online in some way or another. The vast majority of access to them have access to mobile devices. In some cases, it's really interesting to consider that cell phones are the primary way that youth can access the internet, particularly in places where Wi-Fi may be limited or where it's too expensive. Students are using their cell phones to search the web. This also affords them more privacy than, say, a shared desktop computer in the family room. So, again, it's an opportunity that creates significantly more challenges. The following three graphs also come from the Cyberbullying Research Center. This is data that is collected from more than 25,000 middle school and high school students from across the United States. This research indicates, as you can see, that the average reported rate of lifetime cyberbullying victimization is about 28%. And you can see, over time from May 2007 to March 2019, that those incidences have been increasing. So a reason for this increase may be due to the availability of smartphones and more access to the online world. That is one kind of explanation for that. This second slide takes a different look at the data. Using the same research, middle school and high school students reported that they engaged in cyberbullying. Around 15% of them, around 16% of them acknowledged engaging in cyberbullying. So that's a pretty significant difference from the previous slide to this slide, from 28% to 15%. And this really suggests two possibilities. The first is that those who engage in cyberbullying may actually have more than one target, or youth may not recognize cyberbullying behaviors for what they are. And this is something that we'll talk further about as we get into prevention. You may have noticed that we use the term target rather than victim. This is to support the idea that youth can and should feel empowered to stand up to bullying behaviors, and it's consistent with language that is commonly used in prevention resources and programs. We also here have some New York State specific data from the same study, and you see the same kinds of trends. You see the difference in the rate of those who reported that they were engaged in bullying and cyberbullying behaviors versus those who were targets. We have a significantly higher number of students report being the targets of bullying behaviors. The lifetime rate of being cyberbullied is 44% in 2019, while those who have engaged in such behaviors was 18%. In addition, you'll notice that the rates for cyberbullying are lower than the rates for bullying. But as we discussed, the persistence and permanence of cyberbullying makes for a deeply concerning impact, especially if a youth is the target of both cyberbullying and bullying. Statistically, it's important to recognize that some youth are at a higher risk for being the targets of bullying and cyberbullying. In this case, we're talking specifically about youth who identify as members of the LGBTQ community, who are more vulnerable to being cyberbullied than their counterparts. If you nearly 3 times They are nearly 3 times as likely to say that they were bullied online, twice as likely to say that they were bullied via text. 1 in 4 LGBT youth reports being bullied online specifically because of their sexual orientation or gender expression. And 1 in 5 experienced bullying and harassment via text message. So we have to really consider these statistics when we think about prevention programs, and in general how we might want to mold and kind of address those prevention programs. These statistics come from glisten.org. That's glsen.org. They're a great resource which we have included on our website, and furthermore, on our website we do have some guidance that has been provided from the New York State Education Department in this area as well.
Now we are going to move on to learning objective 2, recognizing cyberbullying behaviors and the impact. Here we will discuss what creates more risk, what makes cyberbullying different from in-person bullying, and how it causes harm. These are common risk factors for youth to experience cyberbullying. If there are already patterns of bullying behaviors by someone in person, they are more likely to engage in cyberbullying. This is the same for targets. If they are the targets of in-person bullying, they are more likely to become targets in the digital world as well. If youth have access to digital platforms that aren't secured or don't have safety measures to protect them, they are at more risk of experiencing cyberbullying. If we remember from earlier how new platforms are always being created, we have to remember how they might not have any safety measures, and that can be dangerous. Also, the amount of time youth spend using technology and the more interactions they have in the digital world, the more risk they are of being cyberbullied, especially if there's a lack of supervision with their activity. The number of people we can interact with online in seconds is tremendous, and these people can be anyone from any walk of life.
Cohen, as I listen to these risk factors, it seems as though they are both risk factors for those who engage in bullying behaviors as well as those who are targets of bullying. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true. Thank you. So, what makes cyberbullying different from bullying? One quality is persistence. Digital devices offer an ability to immediately and continuously communicate 24 hours a day, so it can be difficult for children experiencing cyberbullying to find relief. Another is permanence. Most information communicated electronically is permanent and public if not reported and removed. A negative online reputation, including for those who engage in cyberbullying, can impact college admissions, employment, and other areas of life. It is also hard to notice if cyberbullying is occurring. Educators and families and caregivers may not overhear or see cyberbullying taking place, and it becomes harder to recognize if it is happening. So what has allowed for all of this to happen? The answer to that question is the expansion of technology. It is easier to be cruel using technology for many reasons. There is a physical distance between the one engaging in cyberbullying and the target. Using technology can be at any time of the day, with many having unlimited usage. Also, those who engage in cyberbullying can cloak their identity using anonymous or fake screen names and contact info, giving them a sense of protection even though their actions may be used against them one day. Lastly, those who engage in cyberbullying don't have to see the immediate response of the target, and this can reduce the chance for them to feel any remorse or guilt for their behavior. Cyberbullying can happen in addition to in-person bullying, and in some cases can actually cause more harm. Going viral and getting a significant number of interactions with a cyberbullying situation can further harm and isolate the targets. A large number of people from school, the neighborhood, the city, and even the entire world can participate in the victimization of targets, or at least find out about the incident with a simple touch of buttons on their digital devices. The number of potential targets, those who engage in cyberbullying, and the witnesses and bystanders of cyberbullying has no limit. Another aspect of this is that the harm being done might not even be realized by people engaging in or involving themselves in cyberbullying. An example might be a child on Facebook, not thinking of the situation in its entirety, reacting with a laughing emoji face on an aggressive comment from a child cyberbullying another child, and now that aggressive comment is being supported and the target may feel more isolated. What is the impact of cyberbullying? Well, there are many detrimental outcomes that have been reported by youth. First, many targets report feeling depressed, sad, angry, and frustrated. From our research, there was one teenager who said, "It makes me hurt both physically and mentally. It scares me and takes away all my confidence. It makes me feel sick and worthless." Those who are targets of cyberbullying also reveal that they are often afraid or embarrassed to go to school. So now the climate and culture of the school includes the digital climate and culture of the school and its students. In addition, research has revealed a link between cyberbullying and low self-esteem, family problems, academic difficulties, school violence, and various delinquent behaviors. One important piece to note is that targets may not know who is targeting them or why, and this can increase all of the feelings we have said here. Finally, cyberbullied youth also report having suicidal thoughts, and there have been a number of examples in the United States and abroad where youth who were targeted ended up taking their own lives. I am now going to turn it back to Amy, who will focus on prevention.
Thanks, Cohen. Now that we have a better understanding of cyberbullying and its frequency, and we've talked about the behaviors and the impact, what can we do to prevent it? This is probably the most important part of what we're going to talk about today. First, let's recognize that there are some obstacles in prevention, and there's a lot to unpack here, and it really requires us as adults, caregivers, and educators to engage in some self-reflection. And, admittedly, sometimes that can be really difficult, but here we go. Being able to determine when cyberbullying occurs can really be a challenge. And we've talked a little bit about visibility and how it can be hidden, but there's two other factors that really need to be considered and are worthy of some conversation. The first is that youth might not report it. If they think that reporting cyberbullying will result in their technology use being limited or being looked at more closely, they are going to weigh kind of the cost and benefits of making that report. And arguably, the best thing that a family member could do if they find that their child is being targeted online is to pay closer attention to their technology use. But you can imagine young people want their independence, and technology really does afford them a lot of freedom. So they have to make that decision, and sometimes they may decide not to report. And then finally, we really haven't talked much about this, but we should think about cyberbullying as a continuum. As with bullying, for that matter, we want to think about it as a continuum. On one end of the continuum, it may be really difficult to recognize because it's become almost normalized in popular culture, the media, and politics. And this kind of leads us to the second point on the slide, but just think about it for a moment. If you've ever read a news article online and looked at the comment section, I tend to not do that because it frustrates me more than anything. But people could be pretty mean. And while we're all free to express ourselves, I think if we were to really reflect on some of the things that we read, or maybe even some of the things that we ourselves communicate, we'd probably see that the world is full of comments that are not so nice. For young people who follow celebrities, who might get into public feuds with others, sometimes it's appropriate. Conflict should be expected, and certainly we don't always agree with one another. Disagreements can be healthy and promote growth, but that's not always the case. And so many times, what they're viewing through social media and through those online comments is really inappropriate. And for young people, they are impressionable. They tend to be impulsive. They tend to be vulnerable to mimicking things that they see, what they read. They're still developing, and we need to be sensitive to that and mindful of our own communications, both written and verbal. A couple other examples, if you still need more examples, think about how many times you've seen a social media post or a magazine cover criticizing the way a celebrity looks on the beach, or the fact that young people are literally exposed to millions of posts that aren't real because celebrities use Photoshop or filters. So it creates this environment where judgment becomes the norm. So we really have to think about that as we reflect on our own use, but it's all not necessarily negative. These could be very teachable moments, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. And also the reality is that technology is changing very, very rapidly, and it can be really difficult to keep up with. We have to figure out how it is best for us to respond, and sometimes that can be challenging. How do we respond both if it's in the home setting, or how do we respond in the school setting? And then, of course, law enforcement is going to have a very different response. So there sometimes is a tendency to dismiss or disregard some of the things that we might read or see in popular culture. But those are teachable moments, as we said earlier. And if it's occurring with our young people and it's left unaddressed, it really could lead to instances of cyberbullying that fall along that more intensive end of the continuum. So while that may not have any specific answers, it's just something that we all need to consider and think about. What is our role? So when we look specifically at families and caregivers, some of this is really basic. You want to know what platforms your children are using, but you also want to know what are some of the relevant policies. And certainly on social media, you can view those sites and they have policies, and sometimes they have some really great resources. And we'll take a look at Facebook's in a few moments. But you also families and caregivers may want to ensure that they understand what those policies are as it relates to school use. And some schools are using software programs that help identify inappropriate content. And that can be really helpful. And to know and understand what that is just puts you in a more knowledgeable position. Certainly, with increase in social media and all the capacity that's there, we as adults and caregivers really need to educate ourselves. Then also establish reasonable limits and set rules. As Cohen had mentioned earlier, one of the things that puts young people at risk is that increase in access. So just, doing the best that you can as family members, as caregivers, to set reasonable limitations on that, and reasonable rules. And again, there's no one size fits all. This is going to depend on, individual families and caregivers. Some may feel that it's really important that they share passwords. Others might prefer to take a more education, open communication kind of approach. So there's no one size fits all. Families have to figure out what's going to work best for them. But at any rate, promoting open communication is really important, and finding those teachable moments. So I often, whenever I do a training or a webinar, I often say, use this as an example. You could say, I was on this webinar today and they talked about how sometimes people make really inappropriate comments in news articles that can be hurtful. Have you ever seen that? What do you think about that? What do you think that has to do with cyberbullying? Is that cyberbullying? Just having those open communications and conversations. There's so much that we need to communicate and talk to our young kids about that whatever opportunity we can take, whatever excuse we can take, we should do it. And don't feel like we have to have conversations about cyberbullying separate from bullying. There may be more visible instances of one or the other, and take that opportunity to talk about it and then draw the connection with the other. I have 3 children of my own, and they played sports, and I can definitely remember times where, you'd be on the sidelines and you would hear family members or other, fans saying and yelling really inappropriate stuff. Those are teachable moments. We can talk about what it means and how hurtful it is to hear that, and sort of draw the connections to bullying and cyberbullying. Take an interest in the internet and social media yourself. Again, I can only speak from my own experiences. I really didn't spend a lot of time on social media, but I did have a Facebook page when my kids were growing up, because it gave me an opportunity to, as they would say, stalk them, air quotes there. But that was how I knew what was going on. So that was really important. It may not be something that you're comfortable with or you may not enjoy. You don't have to use it, but if you have it, then you can view it. And that's really important um, to consider. Also, just kind of be aware of some of the things that might indicate problems. And this is true for not only cyberbullying and bullying behaviors, but all mental health and emotional wellness. Be cognizant of changes in sleep patterns or in a young person's interest or avoidance of school. As hard as this is right now for young people to sort of be in this situation where there's a lot of, um, you know, social distancing, for those who have been the targets of bullying or cyberbullying, bullying specifically, this could be a little bit of a reprieve for them. And so if you see some changes in the positive, that might be an interesting conversation to begin to have. What is it that's so different now? So what can educators do? There are some really great resources online, both for educators and for family members, and we'll be sharing those through our website. But educators can take the lead in promoting education and awareness for youth and families. You might want to consider like a parent university kind of an evening, or some kind of printable materials that are pretty widely available that you might send home from time to time with whatever's going home. It could be the school schedules. It could be the back to school information that gets sent home, and having opportunities to post it in a place that makes sense on your website as well. Communicate to schools what your policies are. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about that in terms of the resources that are available, but being able to share what your school policy is helps families know how they should respond. Promote a positive and safe classroom culture. It's really about modeling those behaviors, embracing those teachable moments, maybe finding ways to incorporate lessons on bullying and cyberbullying into your existing curriculum. And again, there are some really good resources out there. We posted one recently on social media, and the website's escaping me right now, Cohen. If you think of it, chime in. But it was a video that was created about cyberbullying, and there's lesson plans that go along with it. And it's something that can be really incorporated anywhere. You don't have to wait for a lesson on digital citizenship. You could show a video like that and use it as a writing prompt for an essay, for example. And then as educators, advocate for school or district-wide digital citizenship program or bullying prevention events. And this is a place that's really an opportunity to include. We talked before about how youth who identify with the LGBTQ community thought that they have higher risk, and involving them in any kind of an event could be really helpful as well, and very important. Um, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of an example of one of those policies that you might be able to find online. all online platforms tend to have some kind of policy and information that address safety and standards. And so here is a link we're going to take you to for Facebook. And this brings you to their safety page called Put a Stop to Bullying. And they actually have different resources for both teens, parents, and educators. So for example, if you went to the teen section, there's information on what is bullying, what to do if you're being bullied or a friend is being bullied, and it has information for you there. So most platforms will have this kind of a resource, and that is a great one to use and to share with your students. Some other resources, as I said, we will have some posted at our resource center, and I will take you to that page towards the end, right after our Q&A. So if you have any questions, anything we haven't answered, please post those in the box, in the chat box. Also, the University of Buffalo at the Alberti Center for Bullying Abuse Prevention has a lot of great resources. NetSmart is actually a program of the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So they have a lot of information related to cyber safety. GLSEN, as we mentioned before, and stopbullying.gov, cyberbullying.org, and connectsafely.org. These are all resources that we used in developing this. I should say here as well, we are working with some funding from the New York State Office of Mental Health that will provide us with the opportunity to do additional bullying prevention, cyberbullying prevention resources and some initiatives. We're in the process of creating an ebook that will be available for schools and families that will have a little bit more information about bullying and cyberbullying and how not only resources for schools to prevent it, but also just opportunities for us to really take a look at it through this holistic lens of the culture and climate of schools, how it relates to social emotional learning, etc. So we really are excited about that and look forward to finishing up that project and getting it out to schools as soon as possible. So we're going to open it up now for some questions. There's one question, are schools teaching students about how to prevent cyberbullying? Many schools are. They are teaching what they may call digital citizenship, which is safe and responsible in the use of technology. And also the New York State Dignity for All Students Act does have some requirements related to both education and how to report. So there's this is a common topic that is discussed in schools. And so, you know, if you're a parent listening, another great way to sort of begin that conversation is to say that you attended this webinar today and they said that you learned about this in school. Have you learned about this in school? And kind of begin that conversation. Another one, traditional signs of bullying may not apply to kids spending a lot of time at home and already experiencing behavior changes attributing to the coronavirus outbreak. What should parents be looking for specifically during this time to recognize that their child is being bullied? You know, some of the challenges I think is that we know that being the target of either bullying or cyberbullying behaviors really affects students' emotional wellness and could affect them physically, like through somatic symptoms being present, changes in their sleep, etc. So it's really hard to recognize those signs and be able to attribute them to bullying or cyberbullying. So that's why the communication is so important. We may see these signs, but we don't know what is contributing to the problem unless we have those open conversations. And so it could be things like mood changes. It could be the sense that they're feeling unsafe. It could be difficulty sleeping. It could be withdrawing from friends. It could be acting more aggressively because they're feeling unsafe and feeling that they need to defend themselves all the time. But those are also could be signs of mental health problems. So it's a little bit challenging to recognize that. It's really the key becomes how do you engage and have that conversation. And I will say, and I can't remember if I said this before, we've had so many conversations with folks in the last couple of weeks, but for some kids, they might actually feel safer now if where they were, experiencing um, bullying was at school, then they actually may be feeling safer now and a sense of relief. And so if you see this big change where everyone else is feeling more stress and a young person is maybe feeling really comfortable and talking about not wanting to go back to school, it's definitely worth, trying to engage them in that conversation. And, what is it that makes you not want to go back to school? And it could be bullying behaviors. It could also be just that they've become accustomed and very comfortable to this environment, and there's concerns about getting back into a place where there's a lot of people and social distancing is not possible. So um, there is more, there's another question regarding Dignity for All Students Act and remote learning, and I'm not sure I have the answer to that one. So that is one of those that we're going to get back up on the website in terms of, frequently asked questions and beginning to explore a little bit about how it changes. It is a law that it is a requirement for schools. So the law itself does not change. How schools are implementing the protocols may be a little different, and that would probably be different from school to school. So if you have any questions or concerns about how that's being managed, I would directly contact your school. That's probably the best bet. And again, I know there's some other questions about addressing this in a remote environment, and it is difficult. Schools, I think, are right now trying to figure out a lot of changes to protocols and how to keep kids safe, how to recognize emotional problems, make appropriate referrals. I can promise you that that's a conversation that we've been having with a lot of administrators and educators. So I think it's on everyone's mind, and they're trying to figure that out. Again, every school is probably going to have a different response. So it's worth reaching out to your school administrators, maybe starting with your building level administrators and asking them how have those protocols changed. And so another one is asking if I suspect my child is experiencing cyberbullying, how do I approach the school? And we've kind of addressed the current situation, thinking more broadly about how to approach the school. I really encourage families to really consider that idea that cyberbullying and bullying for that matter happens along a continuum. I think there was a time where us as parents, if there was a conflict with a child and another child, we would either coach them to work that out, or in some cases, we might reach out to the family and say, "Hey, I heard they're having, some difficulty. What do you think? How should we address this?" And I think that's okay to do even when it's a behavior that we might consider a bullying behavior, because again, we're looking at this on a continuum. Certainly at that more intensive end, when it's persistent, when safety and threats are involved, you're not necessarily going to do that. But the more that we can address those conflicts and those challenges early, and help young people learn to problem solve and learn conflict resolution, that is really key. The other piece is I would really be interested in knowing what my school is doing in terms of restorative practices. So for family members who may not be familiar with that, it's really it's an initiative, it's a strategy that helps mend conflicts. And I'm not going to explain it really well, very briefly, except I think that those are questions to maybe um, seek out at your school, and you may find information on their website, or you may need to go to them directly and ask, do they use restorative practices for instances of bullying in school? And be kind of knowledgeable of what that is, and if there's a way that you can initiate that. Just if you're seeing something, it doesn't mean they're seeing it as well. And so there are reporting mechanisms in each school, so understand and be knowledgeable of what the reporting mechanism is for your school. But approach it as a partner in identifying a solution for how can we manage this and how can we address this. a question, do you have resources that we can share with parents for students who have been the targets of bullying or who are? And the answer is yes. I know that they're in those resources that we posted online, but we will get some specific ones that schools can share with family members who are engaged. And again, in some cases, if you're using restorative practices, your resources and your information may look a little different. If you're not, then again, they're going to look a little different. So we'll see what we can get, ensure that we have those specific resources online. And we'll also ensure that we include those in the ebook. So these are really good questions and we appreciate them. We will definitely follow up. Bullying and cyberbullying is really complicated, and it's a very complex issue. There's kind of a lot of dynamics. It's very the consequences and the impact is really troubling and concerning. But again, if we look at this from a continuum, there's a lot that we can do from a preventative standpoint to help shape those behaviors early on. Social emotional learning in schools looks to help students identify how to problem solve and how to build positive relationships. Those are some key strategies for preventing bullying. So social emotional learning is probably one of the best preventative things that we can do, ensuring that we're bringing those into our school. And from that perspective, educators need to be taught social emotional learning. We probably have these skills, but we're not always framing them as adults in that way. So, best practices for social emotional learning says that the adults, the caregivers, the educators, they will be able to develop their skills so they can model them for young people. So we want to think about it from that perspective. And I think also educating family members. So I think we may have covered all questions except for those that we promised we would add more resources to our page. So let me just show you, if you go to our website, mental health, I don't know what that is. I'm going to get out of there for a moment. mentalhealthednys.org. If we Currently on our webpage, there's a web banner, and the very first one that comes up is Youth Cyberbullying Prevention Webinar. So right now, this is where we're holding our resources, and this is where we will have the recorded version of this webinar later today. So if you enjoyed it, we hope you enjoyed it. Please share it with others, share it with your family members, share it with your colleagues. As you can see, these are the resources that we mentioned. We have direct links to them. There's another one called Free to Love, which is a great youth resource. It's kind of cool, kind of edgy. I think young people will enjoy it. There's some great resources there. And we will be sure to answer the rest of these questions specifically on this site as well. So that takes us to about 2:45. So I just wanted to thank you all for participating, remind you that we will be getting more resources together related to bullying and cyberbullying in the next couple weeks. And then October is Bullying Prevention Month. And so we will, push out the resources again at that time and do whatever we can to support school efforts in raising awareness in October and all the time. We know this is a challenging time for everyone, for families and schools, and so we're here to support you in whatever way we can. Please do not hesitate to reach out, and I will take you back to our page here with our contact information. Thank you. Hope you all have a great afternoon.